Welcome to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Right now, we're going through the entire Bible to understand it as one big, cohesive story. We're covering one book each day, and this one's about 2 Chronicles.
Hey, my friends, it's Matt, and today I think we got a pretty easy one with 2 Chronicles, but it's only going to make sense if you listen to the one on 1 Chronicles from yesterday, because these are one book, and they absolutely fit together, lock and key. 1 Chronicles takes us all the way up from like the very beginning of stuff that happens in the Old Testament, all the way up to the end of David's reign, and it reframes a pretty ugly story in a very positive, hopeful light, indicating that somehow through this twisted up, weird family that has been picked, that's been created out of Abraham, and somehow through this at times compromised and difficult line of kings that has come out of David, and somehow through this line of priests that have come from Aaron and Levi, that somehow in all of this, God by his faithfulness is still taking these elements and weaving them together to make this beautiful tapestry that is a picture of redemption. And so Chronicles is really giving the reader permission to look back on all of this very complex multi-season history that you and I have been looking at over the last several episodes, and to see God's faithfulness and hope. Now, look, you and I just went through all of these books, and understandably, we're like, man, there's a lot of dark stuff in there, though. Like the hope theme, sometimes it doesn't feel pronounced just in terms of weight. It's like a 20-to-1 ratio, ick to good stuff, it seems like at times. But that's part of the beauty of 1st and 2nd Chronicles, is that the chronicler is giving himself full permission to say, hey, original audience, you know all of the blunders and all of the missteps and all of the really ugly stuff, but let's just focus on what went right with King David, that's 1st Chronicles, and with what went right with all of his successors who did get it right, and that's what we've divided up after the fact into calling 2nd Chronicles. Now, what you're going to notice about 2nd Chronicles is that it's overwhelmingly just a summary of 1st and 2nd Kings, but without any reference to the northern kingdom. Why is that? Well, I guess it could be out of some sort of deeply harbored bitterness about how badly screwed up the northern kingdom was. But I think more likely it's just that the northern kingdom doesn't really have any claim to the redemptive plan at this point. They got hauled away into captivity by the Assyrians in the 700s and more or less vanish from history. Certainly, at least in the mind of the chronicler, that is the case. But it's out of the southern kingdom and out of the house of David that the chronicler sees the promises of God and sees the hope for this coming Messiah and the hope for getting things right and for getting back on their feet as the people of God and learning from the past mistakes, chief amongst them being idolatry, and not making those mistakes anymore, but also learning from what it was like when they got it right and doubling and tripling down on that get it rightedness. So, simply put, in 2 Chronicles, what we're getting is a summary of the awesome stuff from the awesomest kings of the southern kingdom coming out of the line of David. In fact, there are even some kings who have their flaws emphasized more heavily by the author of Kings, who really come off looking pretty good. I mean, really good in 2 Chronicles as the stuff they got right is highlighted. The deal that we saw God make with Moses was a conditional one where he said, I'm going to be your God, you're going to be my people, and all the nations are going to know that that's true because if you obey me, I'm going to bless you, and if you disobey me, I'm going to punish you. Either way, they're going to know that I'm the one true God and that you are my people. Again, paraphrases mine, but I think it's a faithful one. Well, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and especially 1st and 2nd Kings, show us what happens when you try out the negative side of that bargain. Well, God did exactly what he said he was going to do. He punished them for all the stuff that they got wrong. Again, chief thing they got wrong, they didn't worship God. They worshiped idols. And to the credit of the chronicler and the Jews who came back from exile and all of the Jews who worship God since, they learned. They did not repeat this chief mistake that is recorded in Judges and Samuel and Kings of worshiping false gods. You don't hear anything after this about the Jewish people building up the high places and sacrificing to Molech or Dagon or Asherah or Baal. Those days are over. We don't see more golden calves after this moment. It seems like the lesson really hit home, and I got to think that this big theological recap, like we talked about yesterday, that we're getting here in 1st and 2nd Chronicles really helped with that. It helped people to watch this whole thing and to see all of this story distilled down into just this one book and be like, wow, we really did blow it, didn't we? We really need to rededicate ourselves to these temple practices, to the proper worship of God, the sacrificial system. We need to rededicate ourselves to the worship of God and God alone, and to engaging in these civil practices properly. And if anything, they took it to heart so very deeply and so very well that you can almost see the seeds of the overreaction that the Pharisees and the religious leaders got wrong in the time of Jesus a little later on when we get into Matthew. But we got time before we get to that. So again, though, simply put, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, even Judges, here's what happens when you get it wrong. God will hold up his end of the deal and he will punish his chosen people. But then 1st and 2nd Chronicles, here's what it looks like when you get it right. On the other side of that deal, God will be faithful there as well, and he will honor his promises and he will bless his people. I mean, everybody who's reading 1st and 2nd Kings knows how it ends. The temple gets destroyed. Nebuchadnezzar brings ruin on Jerusalem, and everything is wrecked, and we're all hauled off into captivity, and there's just nothing left. It's horrible. Well, it's a retrospective on what went wrong. It's a post-mortem. It's a Monday morning quarterbacking of a horrible, awful, ugly, inevitable train wreck, slow motion loss. Well, if that's what it is, then this, like I was saying yesterday, is why 1st and 2nd Chronicles are so awesome. It's a slow motion, Monday morning quarterback, looking forward to next week's game. Let's learn from our mistakes, but mostly let's focus on what we got right so that we can have a sense of why this is going to work this time when it didn't last time. Because we're going to lean into these things that went right, and we're going to honor these things that God wants us to honor. And we're going to follow the example of this idealized composite of a great king for the short term that we get from David, and the best exploits of David, I should say, and the best stuff from all these other kings. And all of that together will give us sort of a vision of virtue and what we could be. It's also going to look really good to the Persians, who would probably have access to this book and would just like to know that you're going to do virtue and that you're going to be easy to manage when you live in this new land, because all of this was happening with the permission of Persia. But bigger picture, the composite that we get from all of these little nuggets of the best moments of all of these kings, when you put it together, you start to get a hint of what the great king could look like in terms of virtue, in terms of attributes. You get this tiny little percentage, this little first fruits of what could be the real harvest of what that king could be and what could come with that great king when that one who was promised to come in 1 Chronicles 17 and in 1 Samuel 7, when that great king finally arrives. So this summary of the good stuff of all the kings in 2 Chronicles and the good stuff about David in 1 Chronicles, it also rounds out a question that's introduced in Judges. Remember there, it's, well, they had no king and they just did what was right in their own eyes. I mean, it's the closing line of Judges, and you're like, oh, well, I guess the only glimmer of hope there is maybe if there was a really good king, it would counteract these truly wicked impulses, because humans, they got the disease, the virus of sin. They cannot fix their own evil. Maybe a king somehow could stymie that or address that problem, but it doesn't come into focus at all until 1st and 2nd Chronicles, when the chronicler is like, now imagine a kingdom, now imagine a king who had all the best elements of all the best moments of all of the best kings, and you can start to see what maybe this thing might look like and how there could be a real remedy to the evil of the human heart, the brokenness of the human situation, in not just any king, not just in the office of king, but in a very specific king who is starting to come into focus as we finish up this big overview theological recap that we get in 1st and 2nd Chronicles. When you picture 2 Chronicles, picture a great big giant, very positive theological recap of a wonderful premium TV show that covers a gigantic swath of time with a whole bunch of really good, really likable, really noble kings who get a bunch of stuff right. If you don't have time to read all of 2 Chronicles, check out 2 Chronicles 6, which is Solomon's beautiful blessing of the people at the dedication of the temple and his prayer of dedication. And make sure to read the first few verses of chapter 7, where God shows up in that temple. Those are powerful moments. Okay, my friends, high five. You have just leveled up once again. Achievement unlocked, 2 Chronicles, right on. This really is an achievement, and it's awesome that you're doing it. This has been so good for me. I hope it has been for you as well. I'm excited to move into a whole new era with Ezra next time around. All right, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.
This podcast is supported by many of you at patreon.com/the TMBH podcast. We're grateful because it supports our family.